Sure you're ready for that, Mr. Whitman?
Swords! They're sharp, they can stab things, they're sometimes filled with mystical power that could destroy the universe. They have cool names. Yeah, swords are awesome, and they're especially cool in the Marvel Universe. There's been a ton of really amazing swords all through Marvel's history, and today I wanted to highlight the best of the best. What is the most powerful sword in the Marvel Universe? Well, there's a lot of options. I mean, the All-Black, the Twilight Sword, the Ebony Blade, the Odinsword, there's a lot to talk about. So let's discuss some of the most powerful swords in Marvel right now. Of course, I have to talk about the All-Black first. It's been thrust into the zeitgeist thanks to Thor Love and Thunder, since in the comics, Gorr the God Butcher wields it. But as cool as it was to watch Thor and a bunch of children kick shadow monster butts thanks to some Necrosword magic, the sword we got in Love and Thunder wasn't that comic accurate. And that's probably because of all those pesky rights issues. You see, the All-Black is actually the very first symbiote created by the extremely evil Knull. The All-Black is different from most swords on this list, as it's actually alive and loves to corrupt whoever's using it. Yeah, it has its own evil personality and everything. It's why I wanted to place it first on this list. It's imbued with the power of a celestial, which gives it that extra bit of juice, and it's one of the most powerful weapons in the galaxy. I'm just hoping that Knull is the big bad of Venom 3, and then we can get a proper adaptation of this sword. Wouldn't that be cool? The Twilight Sword doesn't sound like that powerful of a name, right? I mean, when I say Twilight Sword, it probably just conjures up images of Edward and Bella and Jacob, right? Well, what if I told you the Twilight Sword's other nickname is the Sword of Doom? That's more ominous, isn't it? The Twilight Sword has a massive amount of power, and its original wielder was Surtur, the fire demon. It was created thanks to the burning energy of an entire galaxy, and Surtur tried to use it to basically burn down the entire galaxy. Yeah, and it was powerful enough to do it too. So it definitely goes beyond just a normal blade that hacks and slashes. When villains want to retrieve and wield a sword that can bring the whole galaxy to its knees, then that's something that probably should have never been created in the first place. And it even made an appearance in the MCU, and is what Surtur used to destroy Asgard in Thor Ragnarok. Fun fact, in the comics, Beta Ray Bill actually went on the hunt for this sword once, so since he most likely can't have Mjolnir or Stormbreaker in the MCU, maybe they'll give him a piece of the Twilight Sword instead? You know what they say, size absolutely matters, which is probably why the Odinsword is ranked so high on this list. I'll give you 3 guesses who wields the Odinsword. That's right, it's Odin. This sword has a complicated history. So it's humongous, and was said that if it was ever unsheathed, the universe would basically end. So only Odin was powerful enough to use it safely, and he used this sword particularly when the Celestials were coming to fight. To prepare for the upcoming battle, Odin absorbed all the powers of all the Asgardian gods, grew to a gigantic size, and then used the sword for battle. The sad part was that as powerful and how cursed the Odinsword was, and how it would completely wreck just about anyone else, it didn't stand a chance against the Celestials, who destroyed it almost immediately. Bummer. The Ebony Blade is something I expect to have a lot of focus in the MCU going forward. At least, I hope so. It's such a cool weapon, and it's what grants the Black Knight all his special abilities. So far, I've been talking about universe-ending swords, but just your everyday powerful swords deserve love too. The Ebony Blade can not only cut through any mystical barrier or shield, but it can also cut through adamantium, and we all know how strong that is. We better hope Wolverine isn't on whatever team Blade is putting together with the Black Knight. Or would that be awesome? Anyways, the Ebony Blade does come with a downside. Every time it draws blood from an opponent, the user takes one step closer to madness, which, you know, is bad. The Muramasa Blade that Wolverine was gifted in order to exact revenge for his murdered wife came with an incredible origin story. To forge it, the madman known as Muramasa used not only a little of Logan's blood, but also a piece of Logan's soul, crafting an almost indestructible weapon. Would you wield a sword knowing it had a little piece of Wolverine in it? Heck yeah! The sword not only was strong enough to cut through adamantium, but it also had another incredible ability. Any wound made with the Muramasa Blade was almost permanent. I can't imagine a normal person being cut with it, but when normally instant healers like Wolverine or Sabretooth got cut with the blade, the wound didn't heal for days. That's massive. So you know gods, right? Yeah, there are a whole lot of them in the Marvel Universe, and they have a tendency to want to fight each other. Classic god shenanigans. Anyways, one time there was a war between the Greek gods and the Japanese gods. Zeus and Amatsu Mikaboshi, the god of evil and chaos, both went to the same blacksmith and asked him to forge them swords. Awkward. Doesn't that sound like a sitcom episode? Anyways, he did end up making 2 swords, and for this entry, I'll talk about Godkiller. This was a flawed sword, not as perfect as the other one, and it was given to Zeus for the battle. Over time, Zeus eventually lost the sword, and it found its way through mankind, eliminating powerful kings, emperors, and wounding other gods. So yeah, it was definitely a solid sword, and because it was wielded by Zeus and has the cooler name, I'm placing it above the other one. But let's talk about the other one. It was the more perfect sword between the two of them, and it was called Grasscutter. It also has a similar history where Amatsu Mikaboshi had it first, but then it found itself in different hands over the years, causing all sorts of destruction. This one is interesting because eventually it found a way back to Amatsu Mikaboshi after countless years, and the god tried to sow chaos by having Ares' son Alexander eliminate Ares with it. And while the sword was permanently stained red with Ares' blood, Alexander turned the tables and stabbed Amatsu Mikaboshi with it. Full circle. I like it when heroes and villains have all this energy and they use it to form their own weapons. Like, yeah, Green Lantern could just shoot a bunch of green energy out of his ring, but he uses it instead to make cool constructs. That's the basis for the Quantum Sword, which is wielded by Phi-La-Vell. Phi-La-Vell is a hero that has quantum bands, which can be used to unleash massive amounts of energy. All that energy needs to go someplace, so most of the time, Phi-La-Vell used it to create the Quantum Sword. I wouldn't want to fight anyone who is wielding the Quantum Sword, am I right? Ant-Man has basically confirmed that quantum energy is super dangerous. Best not to mess with it. Eventually, this sword took on another name too, called the Oblivion Sword. So quick, what's a cooler name? Quantum Sword or Oblivion Sword? In the 2020 Cable series, we were introduced to the Light of Galador. This sword, while having a unique name, came with an interesting history. So it belonged to a Galadorian space knight named Morn, but he was basically eaten by a monster. Cable pulled the sword and Morn's remains from the monster, and although he liked the sword, other space knights came trying to steal it back. Cable outwitted them all, eliminated them, and kept the sword for himself. Man, Cable's so cool. Cable would go on to power a sword space station with it. I mean, Sword the organization, not a blade. Tough to distinguish in a list about swords, right? Anyways, yeah, the Light of Galador was strong enough to power the entire space station, so it definitely deserves a spot on this list. The Blade of the Phoenix is a mystical sword because it houses a very small piece of the Phoenix Force. We all know the Phoenix Force, right? Big cosmic entity, super powerful. The Fox studio could never adapt it properly to live action. Yeah, you know, that one. But its history is fascinating. So the sword was originally wielded by Rook-Shear, a Shi'ar who was the second being ever to bond with the Phoenix Force. Rook-Shear was eventually corrupted and destroyed a couple of planets, so an Imperial Guard was sent out and took him out permanently. But a little piece of the Phoenix Force remained in the sword, and throughout the centuries, only descendants of Rook-Shear were able to wield the sword and access its true power. Yeah, whenever cosmic entities get involved with sword shenanigans, you know things can get messy.
How exciting.
So Excalibur is a pretty famous sword, right? We all know the general gist of King Arthur and where Excalibur comes from, but I'm going to use this time to talk about Dr. Doom. Yeah, in one Iron Man comic, Doom and Iron Man actually travel through time and wind up in medieval times, where Dr. Doom gains possession of Excalibur and uses it to make himself incredibly powerful. Iron Man is quite surprised when his normally pretty durable armor suddenly finds itself slashed up thanks to the awesome might of Excalibur. Now, all I want is a Doom focus in the MCU, and if we learn that his armor is embedded with the power of Excalibur, I certainly would not be mad at all. Doom always loves to use ancient artifacts to further his own desire for power, and Excalibur is the perfect weapon of choice for him. Ilyana Rasputina is a mutant sorceress who has a close connection with the demonic realm known as Limbo. As a young girl, Ilyana was trapped in this realm for years, and in that time used her own life force to magically manifest a sword to protect herself. This was Soulsword, and yeah, we're getting to the point where the writers just seem to be throwing any name out there to see what sticks. The Soulsword name actually makes sense since it's a piece of Ilyana, and the more Ilyana, who eventually went by the name Magic with a K at at the end used the sword, the more intricate the designs would become and the more powerful the sword got. Eventually, Ileana came to rule at Limbo herself, and the sword became tied to that place. Like, whoever had the sword was considered the leader of Limbo, and only the leader of Limbo could wield the sword. Yeah, it's very powerful and very magical. Dragonfang is something we've seen in the MCU. It's what Valkyrie likes to wield, and it's established there that the Dragonfang are types of swords that all Valkyrie usually have. But in the comics, the backstory is a bit different. There, the Dragonfang is one sword that was forged from the tusk of an interdimensional dragon and was given to Doctor Strange, who eventually passed it on to Valkyrie for her to use. And yeah, the MCU is cool and all, and it's interesting that all the Valkyrie had these special blades, but come on! They robbed us of an interdimensional dragon backstory for that? That's unfortunate. Anyways, the comic blade comes with a whole range of abilities like magic absorption and the ability to recall the blade to your hand, much like Mjolnir. Warriors of Three Sovereigns is a Chinese Marvel comic series that introduces the Sword of Fuxi. According to legend, this sword was labeled by Knull as a divine star-forged weapon which was capable of destroying worlds, but a mortal wielder couldn't unlock its true power. It's an ancient weapon that's wielded by the descendants of Fuxi and projects these awesome green flames that can be used to cut things or be used for ranged attacks. It's a lot like Mjolnir in that it's sentient and can move on its own, so be sure to be nice to it if you ever encounter it, okay? This sword was eventually destroyed and shattered into fragments, but its current wielder was able to create smaller blades from the shards, and it proved almost just as effective. So the Sword of Might is actually tied to Captain Britain. In the original comic series, when Brian Braddock was offered the chance to become Captain Britain, he could either choose the Amulet of Right or the Sword of Might. He did choose the amulet, but the sword definitely has merits. It's been said this sword was forged in the fires that created the universe. Those who chose the sword over the amulet chose violence over reason, but come on, it's a cool sword. Who wants some weird amulet anyway? No, only kidding. The amulet seems like the wisest decision, but I do hope we get Captain Britain's story in the MCU soon, and then we can see the Sword of Might in action. So, the Cerebro Sword is one of the newest swords on this list. It's crazy to think that some swords on here have been around for almost 60 years, and others have been around for like 3 years. Shows the full breadth of the Marvel Universe, right? Anyways, Charles Xavier was assassinated in a recent comic series, and to honor him, Magneto forged a new sword using the metal of Cerebro and turning it into a weapon. But when Xavier was resurrected due to some comic book mumbo-jumbo, Magneto gifted his old friend the sword, and Professor X put it on his wall in his bedroom. Aw, friendship. Anyways, this sword soon was revealed to have Cerebro-y powers, which more people should have anticipated. It had information locked within it that revealed backup minds of almost all mutant kind. So it sounds like one sharp and dangerous hard drive. The Infinity Blade is something I hope we see a version of in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. When Gamora goes off on her own to collect the Infinity Stones herself, she adopts the name Requiem and starts wielding the Infinity Blade. This sword was powered by the Power Stone, so you know that it was no joke. It could have probably ended up doing a ton more damage, but the sword ended up shattered when Gamora tried to hit Emma Frost with it, who had her own duplicate Power Stone, thus causing powers to cancel out. Yeah, I don't expect Gamora to go full evil in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, but it would be cool if she had a purple sword like this one, right? Alright, 2 of these final entries won't be special swords that are some combination combining some power word with the word sword or blade, but I will be talking about Blade's sword here. And am I mentioning this sword so that I can confuse myself by referring to it as Blade's sword? Yeah, definitely. And at least they call it a sword and not a blade. Can you imagine if Blade walked around wielding his blade? Hey, have you seen Blade's blade? Okay, moving on. This sword isn't necessarily all powerful, but it's the perfect weapon for slicing off vampire heads, and the vampire hunter has made sure that it's in peak condition in order to get the job done. She-Hulk just ended, and as we wait to see where the character is going to go next, I really hope that a future season can reintroduce Elizabeth Ross, aka Red She-Hulk. Much like Red Hulk is a villain to the Hulk, Red She-Hulk is a villain to She-Hulk. She's meaner, she's badder, she's red, Surtur, and she also sometimes wields the Savage Sword of She-Hulk. That's the name of this thing, and it's awesome. I've finally figured out what's missing in my life, and it's a Hulk wielding a big sword. I think Red She-Hulk would make an awesome antagonist for She-Hulk, and that's the only reason I included the sword on this list. The final sword on this list is actually S.W.O.R.D, aka S.W.O.R.D, the space organization that stands for Sentient Worlds Observation and Response Department. The video is called Most Powerful Swords, and this counts as a powerful sword, right? Yeah, definitely. Anyways, just wanted to slip this entry at the bottom because I'm really hoping for great things with it in the MCU. It's clear that we'll see more of the S.W.O.R.D organization in the Marvels and Secret Invasion, and my hope is that Nick Fury has been working hard to make S.W.O.R.D a perfect mediator between Earth and all the extraterrestrial life that's out there. The cosmic side of things have grown substantially over the years, and in order for Earth to be a serious player in universe-related incidents, then S.W.O.R.D needs to be sharp. Are there any other cool weapons out there that we should do a list about? I mean, if this is all about powerful swords, then we gotta do all powerful shields, right? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching CBR. See you next time.